Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. 8 years after local politicians agreed on a big transformation of our health service, the man behind the plan has returned to remind them of their promise. I'll be hearing from a senior clinician and a member of Stormont's Health Committee on the steps required to take the Bengoa plan forward. Plus, the historian Diarmuid Ferriter on his new book covering the changing face of Irish society. What does it mean for the conversation around constitutional change?
I think what has been remarkably durable is that gulf in understanding between North and South. There is a very strong sense of partitionism in the Republic. It is quite upfront for a lot of people. They consider Belfast to be another place, a place apart.
And with his take on the past week, I'm joined by BBC Northern Ireland's former political editor, Mark Devonport. 10 years ago, Professor Raphael Bengoa drew the analogy between the running of our health and social care service and a burning platform. Major change was required, he argued, and quickly. We know what happened since then, of course, years of suspension at Stormont and a global pandemic, all of which has left some parts of the service in a state of near collapse. Now, finally, the reform plans look set to get underway, but it won't be easy. I'm joined by Nuala McAllister from the Alliance Party, who's a member of the Assembly's Health Committee, and by Niall McGonigal, the Director of the Royal College of Surgeons here. Welcome to both of you. Niall McGonigal, first of all, the issue is about money as much as it is about how people get their health care. A few years ago, I think the figure of £600 billion £600 million was being quoted as the cost of clearing the waiting lists, and that now seems to be a lot closer to £1 billion. Your predecessor, Mark Taylor, said if that money's not found, it's sticking plasters on the dam that is already bursting. Do you feel you're getting that money?
I think part of the problem, Mark, yes, it has been, is the amount of money that is required to clear waiting lists really is significant. The Department of Health says it's around £135 million per year for over a 5-year period, which is £675 million. They've talked about an additional £80 million once it is implemented, and it's unclear as to whether or not that forms part of the 5-year plan as well, or only kicks in after the 5 years. So somewhere about £1 billion. We've been promised money in the past for waiting lists. In 2021, 2022, there was around about, I think it was about 180 million was given to waiting lists. However, only about 45 of that ever made its way to waiting lists. The rest was used for red flag referrals and time critical surgery instead. So there is a large amount of money required to clear waiting lists, and what we've been offered in the past hasn't actually got that far.
Money is part of the issue, Nuala McAllister, you know that very well, but there are other issues as well, the transformation of the health service and also productivity, something we'll come on to in a moment or two. The Health Minister, Mike Nesbitt, said last week, everyone agrees there should be transformation. It's just that everybody has a different idea of what reform should look like. Do you agree with him on that?
I do, and I think the bigger actual issue here is that everyone agrees transformation is important until it hits their area. And I'm talking about people who live in Belfast or who live in Fermanagh. They have a very different idea of what transformation could look like because they are thinking about their outcomes. And I perfectly understand that. That's right, that people would think about better outcomes for them. But I think the issue for everyone has to be that we remove the politics from health transformation, that we actually have a system that is about better outcomes for each individual patient. And that means that should a person wait 2 years for a first-time appointment in their local area, or would a person be willing to travel that bit further, whether you live in Belfast or further afield or not, if they could have that appointment in 3 months' time? And I think most people would agree that they would much rather travel that little bit further, but get seen quicker. And I think this is part of the overall picture of health transformation.
OK, so whenever you say you want to take politics out of the issue, does that mean that it is above party politics, and whatever the plan is that the Minister and the Department put on the table, you as an Alliance Party representative, your colleagues within Alliance and other parties, if they fall into line with you, will simply back him and not play party politics with it?
Well, we haven't. Alliance has never played party politics with health transformation, and we can look at recent decisions that we are the ones who have actually stood up and said we need to do this. But as long as it is evidence-led, and I think that's very important, Mark, because as a member of the Health Committee, and my predecessors before me have always said, is the department needs to actually be engaging with those people who run the services on the ground. People like Niall from the Royal College of Surgeons to actually see is what is best, how can we best run our surgical hubs, how can we best run the Royal Victoria Hospital, where it is a regional centre now designated by the Minister. How can we best do these things? So long as that is evidence-led, we do support that health transformation. And that's what GOA was about. And it is about engaging with those clinicians.
So, Niall McGonigal, are politicians best placed, in your view, to decide if a policy is, in fact, evidence-led?
I don't think any single group is best placed to make single decisions, Mark. I think clinicians can decide and tell you where services are best delivered and how they are best delivered. And I think there's a very important requirement for Department of Health ministers to listen to that, the people at the coalface that will tell them that this is how a service must run and these are where the problems are. I think it then becomes incumbent upon ministers and politicians to go to the public and support the decisions that are made. And I think a lot of the time...
We don't know if that's actually happening, if the Minister and the Department are actually engaging with the clinicians, and I think that that's really key to making it successful, is ensuring that we have that stakeholder engagement from the very start.
OK, well that's interesting, because that brings us very neatly onto the subject of consultation, and I want to ask you both about that. Niall McGonigal, first of all, you have complained on our programmes in the past about surgeons not being properly consulted about transformation. Are you satisfied with how your views were taken into account when this latest plan was being drawn up by the department?
I don't think we complained about it. I think what we said was, particularly the question that I was asked at the Health Committee was, had the Royal College of Surgeons been engaged with prior and part of the development of the blueprint? I was very clear that as an organisation, no, we were not. And as far as I am aware, no other Royal College was either, be that example the Royal College of Nursing. There have been some surgeons involved during the blueprint, one or two, but in different roles.
So as individuals rather than as representatives of their professional bodies?
But not as representatives.
Right. OK, so the Minister was asked about this very subject in the Assembly, and he was clear, was looking at it again in Hansard earlier today. In his view, there was a process under which the plan was extensively considered by the relevant parties, including the Royal Colleges.
Well, all I can say to you, Mark, is that as an organisation, during the development of the plan, we were not approached as an organisation to comment on it. We were given a draft copy of the plan a couple of weeks before it became public, but that was the only time we saw it or were involved with it.
What do you make in response to what you've just heard there from the representative of the Royal College of Surgeons here in Northern Ireland?
I suspected as much, because we actually, after the Royal Colleges came forward to Health Committee, we then had the department who were actually leading in this policy transformation, and we asked them the same question, and they confirmed then that they had not engaged with the Royal College, and so we asked them, will you engage with the Royal College of Surgeons? So it's interesting to actually hear that that hasn't happened. I'm not at all surprised with what the Minister has said has turned out not in fact to be the case. I think there needs to be that greater level of detail from the Minister himself regarding all of the issues that health are facing, and we've seen that in the past recent weeks. It's not now an end case scenario. We now can have that consultation, and if the department and the Minister are listening this morning, this is now an opportunity to actually get on board and engage properly.
OK, well, the Minister's not here to defend himself, but it was very clear reading his comments in Hansard that he believes that the proper process of consultation was undertaken by his department and by department officials. Just hearing what Niall McGonigal has said, what does that do in terms of your interpretation of the integrity of this plan? Well, look, I don't believe that the plan itself is the decision-making of what will happen in Northern Ireland. So what we have is a blueprint, a framework, say, of what will take place afterwards. I think the integrity of it has been lost a little bit because of that disingenuous nature of the information that we have. However, it should not stop the progress from taking place now. And if we were to get the likes of the Royal College of Surgeons, nursing on board now for the delivery plan, because, Mark, that is what's important here. It's the actions that come out of this. It's the actual delivery of the actual blueprint to reconfigure our services. Where does this leave the integrity of the plan from your perspective now?
I think we just need to be a little bit careful sometimes, Mark, in this, is saying that yes, we were not involved with the design of the blueprint. We have been involved with the Department of Health, we have been involved with the Health Minister, we have been involved with the Permanent Secretary on many aspects of transformation, both currently and in the past. But when asked, were we part of the development of this blueprint? No, we were not.
Okay.
We will give, as part of the public consultation to it, we will give a very strong and robust view of what our members feel is deliverable and is not deliverable.
So let me ask you about this plan as it is currently constituted on the table at the moment. Is it something that can deliver the transformation that everybody seems to want?
I personally would like to see some sort of more meat on the bones of the plan of where it wants to go. The plan tells us, it tells us what a local hospital, an area hospital is, what a general hospital is, but it doesn't tell us what services are going to be delivered out of each of those and which services will be in each region.
And why did that take so long to actually come up with that? I mean, and then the Health Committee could have written that blueprint through its engagement with the stakeholders. I think what's important is what will come out after it, what will the actions
And we're now
be?
in another further process of consultation,
Yeah.
which I suppose is, you could argue, a good thing, although consultation doesn't deliver speedy outcomes, and we know that very well.
Oh yes, so we've seen that in other areas of health and social care transformation. We just heard a motion in the Assembly this week regarding, it was first consulted on in 2012, and we still haven't seen the actions that implemented from that. So consultation is good to hear the evidence and engage with the stakeholders, but it means nothing unless you're going to deliver upon it.
Okay, and just a final thought from you on this next consultation stage. You would want to be influencing it, and you would want others presumably to be influencing, so that we all end up with the best possible plan at the end of the day.
I think we and our members certainly will be influencing. I think all of the Royal Colleges will be influencing it, and I think we have a great opportunity, following on from Professor Bengoa, to really kickstart transformation of our healthcare service in Northern Ireland.
Okay, got to leave it there, folks. Thank you both very much indeed for coming in to join us. Listening to that, Mark Davenport, just to pick up on that, I mean, it is interesting. You get into all kinds of definitions of precisely what consultation and what pre-consultation is, but it is obvious that as things stand, we're moving forward slowly, but there are still issues that need to be resolved.
Yeah, we are still moving forward very slowly. What's pretty clear in that latest blueprint from the Health Department is they're not talking about cutting hospitals completely. Instead, they're talking about repurposing certain hospitals in order to concentrate on certain services. As the Royal College of Surgeons was making clear there, it hasn't really got very specific. We don't know exactly what will be left in some of these local hospitals and what will be reserved for the general ones. And we have to get onto that kind of area, because really we have been talking about this a long time. We are struggling with a crisis. A lot of good work is being done in the health service. Sometimes that gets forgotten about at these times. But nevertheless, we're struggling with some of the longest waiting lists in Western Europe, you'd have to say. It's really a situation that can't go on. And we have to get beyond the talking stage and towards the reorganising stage. And even then, I'm not sure that there's ever going to be a perfect answer, because we're dealing with an ageing population, scarce resources. Yeah. It will always be a case of, I think, juggling what we can do with the demands placed upon it.
Just very quickly in a sentence, I mean, you were political editor here for a long time. Throughout your entire time in that job, there was one report after another. This was an issue in Health Minister's in-trays for a very long time, and it's still in Mike Nesbitt's in-tray.
Yeah, because of the intractable nature of the problem, because we obviously have events that come along like the pandemic that get in the way. But nevertheless, I don't think we'll ever fully take the politics out of this, because if we do end up effectively cutting a hospital, then there will be local opposition to it.
Okay, got to leave it there, Mark. We'll talk to you again later, but for now, thank you very much. Now, the big political, economic and societal change we've seen in the Republic over the last 30 years is the subject of the historian Diarmuid Ferriter's new book. Along with those changes, of course, comes the question about how and to what extent the Republic's relationship has evolved with Northern Ireland. When I met up with Professor Ferriter recently, I began by asking him about the importance of the Northern Ireland peace process over the quarter century he covers in the book.
We are lucky as historians now that we have access to some of the state papers relating to the peace process in London and in Belfast and in Dublin. And the historian is in a very privileged position, because you're in the room. You know, you do have a ringside seat. And it is a circus. There's an awful lot of it that amounts to a circus. But there's also very fundamental issues at stake in relation to identity and concepts of citizenship and the idea of the historic prizes that are either being taken away from people or for others are being solidified in terms of where they see themselves in relation to the big constitutional questions. That's of massive consequence for the island as a whole. And I think what's interesting, I suppose, about the southern perspective on this is that there's an overwhelming endorsement of the idea of compromise. There's very little talk about the traditional aim of reuniting Ireland. The focus is very much on the idea of leaving a particular phase behind and moving on to a process that involves really dispensing with the more emotional aspects of desires for a united Ireland.
What I'm interested to know is when you sat down to do your research, when you went through the archives, did you get a sense, Diarmuid, that people in the Republic of Ireland now understand this place, Northern Ireland, better than they did 25 years ago?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I think
Which is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, I think what has been remarkably durable is that gulf in understanding between North and South. There is a very strong sense of partitionism in the Republic. That is a legacy of a much earlier phase. It goes right back, of course, to the difficulties of the 1920s and the solutions that were derived in the 1920s.
Do you think it's almost subconscious?
No, I don't think. I mean, I think it is quite upfront for a lot of people. They consider Belfast to be another place, a place apart, even though it's only 100 miles up the road from Dublin. I think people deliberately switched off. I also think that because of the legacy of another event that will be marked next year, the Boundary Commission report, when the border was kind of settled, that there was a turning of the backs and there was a sense that this is not a business we want to engage with now because we have so many other issues to deal with. That has lasting consequences because those attitudes are inherited as well, and there's a very strong sense of abandonment and a feeling of betrayal. And that endures as well. So that misunderstanding, some people will be quite upfront in the Republic, in my experience of looking at it over the last 25 years, about wanting to get that issue sorted in the North because of the fear that it might spill over or the fear that we might have to deal with the consequences of it. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are fully engaging in the idea of a broader identity for themselves or engaging with the realities of the North.
Well, I wonder what your conclusions are within the book about where all of that leaves us in terms of the potential for constitutional change, because there are some people who would say because Northern Ireland is, as you've suggested, a place apart and now the devolution project is up and running again, constitutional change has maybe been pushed further away than ever before, arguably. Then the other side of the argument is that maybe because politics in the Republic of Ireland has changed, it's more progressive, it's less dominated by the church. Ireland is a wealthier country now than it was 40, 50 years ago. That actually makes the case for constitutional change. What was your conclusion as far as that's concerned?
How much political capital is there deemed to be in the Republic in the idea of constitutional change? I remember reading an interview with Pierce Doherty as a senior Sinn Féin spokesperson in 2018, and he acknowledged the core aim of his political party and the unity of Ireland. But he had to acknowledge, in his own words, that for his constituents, it is not their burning issue. Now, it was clear to me around the time of the Brexit vote in 2016 that something had shifted, that this was going to open up an awful lot of questions that many people consider closed or wanted to be closed. Because of the nature of what was going on within the United Kingdom itself, and because of Northern Ireland's position within that. Northern Ireland had always been treated differently, and this was going to call for different solutions again for Northern Ireland, and that did raise the possibility again of opening up these constitutional questions. But there was much exaggeration as well about the idea that the unity train had left the station, and Mary Lou MacDonald was fond of asserting that unity was being talked about in every town and village in the country as a necessary and realisable conclusion very soon. That was a wild exaggeration, and she did acknowledge in other ways that there wasn't much engagement outside of the political bubble, and that for me is one of the core issues in relation to these constitutional questions. You know, moving that discussion beyond the academic or the political bubble to the idea of a deeper civic engagement. And you don't see much evidence of that being a priority for the electorate in the Republic when they're asked, as they are asked each time they vote, what their priorities are in relation to the issues that are at stake. Unity does not feature very strongly.
Anglo-Irish relations also fascinating throughout this period. Bit of a roller coaster ride, it has to be said. We had the highs of the peace process. We had the Queen and Martin McGuinness shaking hands famously in Belfast. We had her state visit to Ireland, and then those challenging years seemingly triggered by Brexit. Do you get a sense now at the end of this period covered in the book that things are on a bit more of an even keel again with a new administration in London, apart from anything else?
I do think things have calmed down, and obviously Starmer as a Prime Minister was very keen on the idea of resetting or rebooting, and there was much more emollient language being used. But I think the damage that was done by the Tory implosion and their very contemptuous and dismissive attitude towards Ireland and the significance of the border question did lasting damage. That's not necessarily going to be resolved by a Labour Party government. There is the enduring relevance of that age-old advice that was given to James Callaghan: don't get sucked into the Irish bog. I think there is still a reluctance around the idea of getting sucked into the Irish bog, but there's also the question of how much political capital there is in Anglo-Irish relations for British politics. Now, clearly there is a desire to take the coarseness out of it. There's also the desire to be practical. We have to be conscious of geography as well as history when it comes to Anglo-Irish relations. But there's a feeling too that the issues that are at stake are not quite of the same consequence as they were during the peace process.
Can we just talk a bit about the change that you point to as significant over this 25-year period in the Republic of Ireland specifically? I mean, you talk about the change in terms of economics from boom to bust to boom again, the decline in influence of the Catholic Church, changing attitudes on social issues like abortion, marriage equality, divorce, and then big changes in party politics as well. Who would have thought that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael would end up in government together? Easy to maybe underplay all of those things, but Ireland today is completely different to Ireland, the Ireland of the textbooks that we had in the 1980s.
There's no doubt about that. I mean, I grew up in the 1980s and I remember very strongly the narrative of a failed state. And this book is not about crafting a narrative of a failed state. It's about acknowledging what was achieved in relation to Ireland's potential. When I talk about the revelation of Ireland, it's also the potential that was revealed in relation to building a successful economy and, integrating the degree of immigration that becomes a part of the story, the number of people who want to settle in Ireland. It's also about greater social mobility. It's about greater personal freedom as well. But I was conscious too that there is this inability to solve this dilemma of how to manage wealth. We don't seem to have been able in the Republic to manage wealth particularly well. We're still talking today about issues that I term the social contract issues in relation to housing and health. There was a certain potential that was revealed there to finally solve these decade-long problems because the resources were there to do it. But then it emerges that, well, maybe it wasn't really a resource problem. Was it more a structural problem, or was it a management problem, or was it partly to do with so much being dictated by the electoral cycle? I got very interested in the idea of the absence of grand long-term designs or visions or philosophies, which might seem horribly old-fashioned. Instead, we had these mantras around the idea of Ireland being the most globalised country in the world, of Ireland outperforming its rivals. We had these arrangements in place in relation to tax havens and so on. And we had this growing gulf between those who were becoming spectacularly wealthy and those who felt very much left behind, which also finds its way into the greater fracturing around politics.
And the role of women in politics and in public life on the island of Ireland over this period upon which you're focusing is also fascinating, isn't it? Because yes, there are all kinds of figures who have contributed to political change, from Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern to David Trimble and Leo Varadkar. But when you look at some of the women who have contributed, their efforts are very significant indeed. Mary McAleese, Mary Robinson, Mary Lou MacDonald, And in the north, you could point to people like Mo Mowlam, Monica McWilliams, Michelle O'Neill and Arlene Foster.
Well, what becomes even more interesting when you look back now, 25 years on, it was just the maleness of the peace process. Mo Mowlam was hated by many senior unionists, and that becomes clear from the papers and the accounts of the meetings. You also had the assertion by Peter Robinson that the traditional place for an Ulster woman was standing behind her man. The idea that women should have a prominent place in politics was being rubbished, even relatively recently. Trying to break through that was very difficult. I mean, Monica McWilliams of the Women's Coalition asserted herself that it would be easier to solve the sectarian issue in Northern Ireland than it would the patriarchal issue in Northern Ireland, and there was an unvarnished hostility towards many of the contributions that they were trying to make. But at the same time, there has been a recognition that the political landscape had to change. Now, there's still only 22% of TDs who are elected are women, but there are specific gender quotas and rules in place in relation to the funding of political parties. There's also a recognition that the contribution of women, north and south, has to become a political norm and is certainly for the betterment of politics. And you have a situation 25 years after, or a little over 25 years after, the signing of the Belfast Agreement, where you have women in these very senior positions. And they're not necessarily thought of now as women in politics. They're thought of as political leaders. So that has been a significant change in the culture.
Dermot Ferreter talking to me earlier this week, and his book, The Revelation of Ireland, 1995 to 2020, is published by Profile Books. Just time for a final word with Mark Devonport. Mark, we need to talk about Sinn Féin in the time we have left. One of the party's high-profile TDs, Brian Stanley, resigned last night.
Yes, he's the head of the chair of the Public Accounts Committee in the Dáil. He's been involved with Sinn Féin for about 40 years. Not so well known here, apart from there was a controversy about tweets about the Narrow Water IRA attack about 4 years ago, which he certainly apologised for some of the comments that he made anyway on social media. But he's now stepped down, apparently after an internal inquiry in Sinn Féin, which he believes was flawed. He's effectively saying that the party ran a kangaroo court about him. We still don't know all the full details, but he's saying he's going to sit on in the Dáil now as an independent Republican TD, and the timing's not particularly good for Sinn Féin, obviously, with an election coming potentially in weeks or months.
Yeah, and we've also, of course, had the McMonigle case, another TD stepping down earlier in the week, and then revelations about a Sinn Féin member allegedly reported to the police for sending inappropriate messages.
Yes, so the fallout from this has not been great for Sinn Féin. Certainly their initial reaction to the Michael McMonigle affair was very poor, because they were effectively casting aspersions on the British Heart Foundation, had to apologise to them. They've got time now to repair the damage in the north, but what will happen in the south, where this is going to feed into a controversy, I imagine, with other parties throwing accusations at them and them defending themselves now in the run-up to a very imminent Dáil election.
Yeah, and Patricia Ryan, of course, that TD who stepped down earlier in the week. OK, Mark, out of time, got to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for today. I'll be back with The View, as usual, on Thursday at 10:40 on BBC One. Do join me for that. For now, though, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.